So the Kirschenmann Lecture was launched in 2015 to honor our board president, Fred Kirschenmann, who is one of the pioneers of organic agriculture in this country and a tireless advocate for agroecological ideas and agroecological farming. So this lecture is designed to explore many of the topics that Fred is most passionate about, including issues faced by today's young farmers, the principle of shared value, land ethic, and how we can foster a community of more resilient agriculture across the United States. Fred, anything else you're passionate about? And this year, we are delighted and honored to have Chellie Pingree, a Congresswoman from Maine, here with us at Stone Barns. So just a little introduction of Chellie. In the 1970s, the Congresswoman, a self-described back-to-the-lander, started an organic farm on the island of North Haven in Maine. So she's like doubly brave. So she started a farm in an extremely cold and harsh climate. And she still owns that farm, Turner Farm, which is a diversified organic farm in her hometown. In Congress, Chellie has been an advocate for reforming federal policy to better support American agriculture that advances sustainable, organic, and locally focused farming. And many of the provisions and ideas that she's brought to the floor were advanced in the 2014 Farm Bill. With her current seat on the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Agriculture, she is focused on trying to make more reforms in the upcoming reauthorization of the Farm Bill. She has introduced legislation to increase investment in organic research, support the growth of local and regional agricultural markets, and to support young farmers. So we're so delighted to have her here tonight. At a time when much of the national political discourse around sustainability seems to be sliding backwards, Chellie continues to push forward and set the bar for what a sustainable food future could look like. Just 2 weeks ago, she launched a bipartisan caucus to explore ways to reduce food waste in the United States. So 40% of the food that we grow in the United States goes to waste, and she's trying to address that problem. And I'm proud to say that Chellie's interest in this issue was deepened when she attended a 2014 conference that we co-hosted with the New York Times here at Stone Barns. So right now, Chellie is in the middle of negotiations about the 2018 Farm Bill. This is the most critical piece of legislation affecting young farmers and sustainable farming in the US. And here are just a few reasons you should care about it. It's the place where training programs for young farmers are funded. And the average age of farmers in the US today is 58.5. So we really need to support young farmers, or there's not going to be anyone to grow our food. It funds critical conservation programs that help us steward our lands and waters. And it is where small steps have been made toward leveling the playing field for small and mid-scale diversified farming and local and regional farming. So tonight we've asked Chellie to give us more of a sense of the current state of affairs with the Farm Bill and what is at stake. And we're lucky to be hearing directly from someone who is so engaged in this issue right now. Chellie's also a longtime friend of Fred's and Stone Barns and was a contributor to our book, Letters to a Young Farmer, in which she wrote a personal essay of gratitude toward those who are taking up the critical work of farming in the next generation. In the first paragraph of her essay, Chellie expresses deep gratitude to young farmers and those who are thinking about becoming farmers. Her final sentence is, "We need you, we really, really need you." And tonight, before we begin, I want to redirect that statement at Congresswoman Pingree. We need you. We really, really need you fighting for better farming. And to thank you for all that you're doing to support a better food future. But we can't put it all on Chellie. And this leads to one last thing that I want to thank her for before turning the microphone over. People often ask me what they can do, what action can they take to support more sustainable farming. And you very concisely answered that question recently in an interview with Food Tank, so I'm going to appropriate your answer. Food Tank asked you, what agricultural issue would you like the next president to address? And you said, we should start making sure that the candidates for president talk about food in campaigns. When Americans start voting based on the food policies of candidates, the food system will change rapidly. So we, all of us here who care enough on a night like this to come out and hear about the Farm Bill, have to help Chellie and let our elected officials know that we care about changing the way America eats and farms, and that we want to work together to plan for a more regenerative food future. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to this year's Kirschenmann Lecturer, Chellie Pingree.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I am very honored to be the Kirschenmann Lecturer. To have a lecture that's named for Fred is a wonderful thing. He is one of my food, farming, organic world heroes. He's incredibly wise. He's very devoted to this wonderful place, and I could just sit and listen to him talk all day. So I don't know why he has to sit and listen to me, because I would rather have it be the reverse. But thank you very much for all the work that you do, for your devotion to this enormous challenge in front of us, and for the many years you have given to this movement. And to Stone Barnes, thank you very much. Thank you, Jill, for the nice introduction, and just for having me here, to all of you, for coming out on a nice night to have to listen to me. But also just for this institution. There are so many things that we have to have in our lives to help us understand the food system better, to know more about the food that we eat, to engage young farmers in the conferences that happen here, and to be apprentices here. So this is just an important part of what needs to be done. So I've got a little talk here, and I'm going to leave plenty of time for questions. So I'm not going to get too geeked out on the Farm Bill. My other hero, Marion Nessel, is here, and she can teach the Farm Bill 101 back and forth, and I couldn't begin to do that. But I'm going to give you the highlights, the politics, kind of where we are, and anything else we can answer later, or Marion can answer it for me, or Fred can. But if you indulge me here, I'm not always great on the slide thing and all that, but I'm going to give it a try. And you have to indulge me a little, because I have to, I got to do that thing. Let's see. Okay, I think I got it. Just a little bit about, you heard a little bit about my background, but why I care so deeply about this, and actually why I think I'm particularly well suited in Congress to argue with my colleagues about this, because I have been engaged in this topic for a very long time, and I do still operate a farm, even though I can't be there every day to do all the hard work. I'm originally from Minnesota, which is a terrible scourge if you've been in Maine trying to be in politics, but I didn't get to Maine until I was a teenager. This is my grandparents were Norwegian immigrants. They had a farm in southern Minnesota, and I'm the little kid in there, so I had some exposure to farming. But I did come to Maine as a hippie back to the lander in the 1970s with a copy of Helen and Scott Nearing's Living the Good Life, so I was very committed to sustainable food and trying to do things differently in a world that was a far cry from how people view that today. I was a student at College of the Atlantic, ran the composting system there, and was lucky enough to have Elliot Coleman, another one of my agricultural heroes, as my teacher. And I do live on an island 12 miles off the coast of Maine. We have about 400 year-round residents there, and it does take an hour to get the 12 miles on a ferry. So I'm pretty sure I'm the only member of Congress who lives on an island, and I really do. My first farm was in the mid-'70s. We had about 2 acres of vegetables, and 3 cows, 3 milk cows. That's when I first learned to milk a cow. Pigs, chickens, and I raised 3 children there. I also got into one of my earlier businesses, which was a knitting company called North Island Designs. We made, I had a lot of sheep, so we turned it into wool. And then we made hand-knit sweaters and sold knitting kits to about 1,200 stores around the country and through 100,000 catalogs. And I didn't sell that business until I got into the legislature in 1992 and couldn't balance both. But now I balance a business and as a member of Congress, and it's a very good way to learn about the challenges that you face in business or in farming, as well as the policy that we work on. So I own an inn called Nebo Lodge on North Haven. I've owned it for 13 years. It was originally built in 1912. And I used to live next door, and I didn't ever intend to be an innkeeper, but you know that thing where you say to your next door neighbor, if you ever decide to sell that place, just give me a call. And then one day they call you, and you feel this obligation. Our community didn't have an active inn at the time, and it seemed like a good part of the economic cornerstone of our community. And it's been a challenge ever since. But I'm lucky enough to have 2 daughters who live in the island, one who manages our business, and one who runs a competing restaurant to us. This is our restaurant. That's why you have children. We have about a 100-seat restaurant that operates from May through October. And then once or twice a week in the summer, we open up our barn and serve another 100 people. And we have them tour our farm. It's a little bit like coming here, only nowhere near as cool. But they tour our farm. They hear a lot about how we grow everything, and they hear from the chef and from the farmers who work on the farm. We try to grow as much of the food for the farm as we can. We're certified organic. We have about 2 to 4 acres at any one time of vegetables farmed very intensively. We raise 35 pigs a year. And we do a lot of our growing in either 3 heated greenhouses, which are heated by wood that we harvest on the property, or 5 hoop houses, which you saw. And part of the reason, just like they do here, that we do that there is because it's a very cold spring in Maine, and in order to have vegetables when we actually have customers, which is mostly in July and August, as many of you who visit Maine know, we have to get an early start. Our goal every year is to have ripe tomatoes before Elliott Coleman, which is a good way. We also run a winter CSA, and feed the families on the island in our heated greenhouses. Just to be honest, I took this picture yesterday, so you can see our tomatoes are getting there. It really is our focus. And that's us in the winter, because we believe in trying to do what we can all year round. So that's about what I do now. But as I said, it's very important to me to be 1 foot on the farm and 1 foot in Congress, because while everybody doesn't agree with me all the time, I can always argue them back and say, no, actually, I know how that food safety law will implement itself on a farm if we have to test our drinking water every month. Or for a long time, we were on a chicken slaughterhouse under our barn, and I could say, remember, I eviscerate chickens on the weekends. So we are in a time of great changing policy around agriculture, and there are a lot of challenges that we're facing. But there are some really good things that are happening. Part of the reason that you're all here and this place exists. People are much more interested in buying food locally, which is great. People care about supporting farmers and care about the treatment of people who work on farms. We've all been told quite a bit about healthy eating, so we know much more about the toxins in our food, about the toxins and fats and things that shouldn't be in our diet, and we're anxious to eat better food. We care much more about humane practices and understand more about how animals are raised and how they should be raised. And people are increasingly understanding environmental health, things like the loss of pollinators, the runoff, the deterioration of our soil. There's a million things that we needed to know about that we know more about now, and it's spurred part of this movement for people to eat healthier food. I could go into great detail about each one, but they're all critically important, whether it's how you take care of your own health or how we take care of the health of this planet, which is of great concern to so many of us. If we had organic farms around the world, we could probably sequester all the carbon that we produce today, and we would have a much healthier planet, and we would have a lot less toxins in our water and in our food that are contributing to diseases and ill health. So this awareness that we have now, I believe, is driving this growth in the market. Buying food locally has become much more important, which is great for the farmers. You can often get a better price if you sell directly off your farm. We sold about $8.7 billion worth of local food in 2015, so that number is only growing. And another wonderful statistic is the growth in organic. And you don't have to eat everything in life organically grown. Everything doesn't have to be organically grown. But I love this chart because it gives you a sense of the fact that this is nearly a $50 billion industry today. And that means that people are seeking it out. The marketplace is helping to drive us. It means farmers often get a much better price if you grow the food organically. The farm worker and the farm itself doesn't have to deal with the same toxins, and it's healthier for everyone. And it's obviously healthier for the people who eat it. Almost 15% of the produce that we eat today is organic. And for anyone who was engaged in this in the 1970s, when organic food was kind of a weird hippie Birkenstock thing that nobody knew much about, the fact that it's mainstream today, that Walmart is attempting to be the largest retailer of organic food in this country, shows that it comes through all economic levels, and people are concerned about this everywhere. So the challenge for me and for people who work on food policy, and often this is true in a lot of policies, is how you get legislators and legislative bodies to make policies that are in keeping with what's actually going on in the consumer world, in the market out there, in what's often the right thing to do. And as you know, many times Congress or legislative bodies, we follow the public. We wait till it becomes a trend, and then we say, oh, what a good policy. We'll get involved in that. And so that's sort of my constant challenge, is how we get a food system where food and agriculture policy matches our ideals for all of these things, from the environment to climate change to our own health. So that leads us to how bad things really are in food policy today, and we have a very long way to go. This is one of my favorite representations, and I need to update it a little bit. But you know, in the Obama administration, when they came up with My Plate, and they gave you a good sense, we've all seen these kind of graphs that show us what we should eat, how much of it, how we should divide up our diet. This would be a very healthy way to eat every day. But this is what it really looks like in terms of how our subsidies are directed and our dollars are spent. So you can see fruits and vegetables, that tiny, tiny little portion, whereas on your plate they were meant to take up almost half. So we have a long ways to go, and much of our money is very much misspent. And that has a lot to do with why we eat the way we do and why it's so hard to access healthy, affordable food. There's another big factor that goes on that influences this. One of the reasons it looks like that is because how Congress is lobbied. And not every bad decision is about lobbying, but that gives you a little sense of $35 million spent a year on agriculture, food processing, that sector. And I like to put this up so people realize it's more than the defense industry, and we often think of that as a big heavyweight player. But that makes a big difference when you're trying to change the status quo. It's reflected in what farmland looks like in the United States. You can see how much goes to soybeans, corn, wheat, and how little goes to vegetables, fruit, and nuts grown in this country. And if you looked at the organic percentage, which is in huge demand, it would be much tinier, meaning that now, today, with this big demand in organics, we're now importing much of our organic food, which A, takes away a very good market from our own farmers, but also means we have less ability to have jurisdiction over the protection of the brand, of making sure that certified organic is really certified organic. As I mentioned earlier, obviously health is a big component of this. And not only is it something that we've all learned much more about how we should eat, but it's a big cost in this country that we don't have healthier eating. You look at the numbers there, $147 billion in obesity-related health care costs. Think how much better it would be if we had far more input into investing in fruits and vegetables or organic farming or more buying locally. 7 to 10 of the leading causes of death are chronic illness. So we know we have to do this much, much better. So we've got the Farm Bill. Farm Bill comes up every 5 years. It deals with a broad range of policy, from conservation to nutrition to every possible policy we have around agriculture. It's an important bill for farmers, for policymakers, and it's how we resolve all of these differences that we have in policy, and it's the one opportunity we have to really make a stand. Farm Bill spending looks a lot different than most people think. You probably don't generally know that 80% of the Farm Bill goes to nutrition programs. The bulk of that is SNAP benefits, what we used to call food stamps. And each one of these other program areas, while important, get a very small percentage. Crop insurance and commodities tend to be the places that we fight about, the maybe misguided spending I showed you in some of those earlier slides. So you can see when you get right down to it, conservation and other is all support for small farmers, beginning farmers and ranchers, organic research. All those wonderful things we care about are just 1% and 6% of this whole bill. So we should just loosen up a little bit, spend more money on those things that we really care about, and understand if we would invest a lot more up front, whether it's an environmental issue or our public health issues, we'd be doing far better in the end. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work that way. There are a lot of changes that need to happen to the Farm Bill, and just overall, they're the things that you tend to know about. Crop insurance and commodity programs are subsidy programs that could use a lot more accountability, whether it's accountability about who owns that farm, what the cap is on their income, what the highest level of income you should be able to have and still receive those benefits, whether you're really the one who puts the plow in the ground and actually engaged in the farming. There's a whole lot of things that should change about that. And changing those things, which are, I can guarantee you, the most difficult policies to change, would free up a lot more money for that little tiny 1% that we'd like to do much more about. You heard mentioned earlier that I put a lot of work into the last Farm Bill. I've been in Congress now for 10 years, so I've been lucky enough to be here through one Farm Bill cycle. It was a very bipartisan effort. We proposed a lot of legislation, and we're able to get a lot of it included. This is me. This is what a congressperson looks like when they're talking about the Farm Bill to their constituents. But some of the things that we worked on were more promotion of farmers markets, local food promotion to create better markets for farmers, value-added producer grants, which are really just wonderful small grants that farmers can receive. Sometimes they're used to put up hoop houses or add a little dairy, a little cheese-making operation to your dairy or something similar like that. Specialty crop block grants, which are how our states get funded. Organic certification cost sharing. There's so many people who are conventional farmers today who want to get into the organic market, but it takes 3 years to change from conventional to organic, so that's a support system for that. We tried to create new crop insurance to be for more diversified farms. We worked on a lot of wonderful things, and we were very pleased that we could make some change. We didn't change all of the big picture things in that other graph, but a lot of what we're able to do is get more support for the things that we think will really change what we care about. We have a lot of priorities for this Farm Bill that we've been working hard on to get engaged in this Farm Bill. Organic Agriculture Research Act, that's important to us because, as I showed you today, this is a huge and growing market. About 13% of our fruits and vegetables are now organic. Yet when you do a study at the USDA, you find out that about 0.1% of the research dollars go to organic research. So you can't just say to a whole group of farmers, growing organically is great, but just do it like you did in the 1800s and never put any money into research and new techniques and the technology that we have today. So we're working very hard on that. And we have a variety of other things that, again, support farmers' programs, make them easier to navigate, get more funding into the things that we care about. And some things for consumers that I want to talk a little bit more about because I'm going to get into what the big challenges are. You also heard that I have a bill called the Food Recovery Act. That's about the 40% of waste that is what happens to our food today. If you think about that, it's a huge waste of resources, whether it's the water that goes into the food, the transportation, the 7 days that your food spends on the road before it gets to you in the grocery store, just an enormous loss of resources, the farmer's time, particularly in a time when we have so many people going hungry. So we have a bill that goes from consumer education, how to waste less food in your home, all the way through how farmers can be protected if they donate more food, how retail operations can have more Good Samaritan protections, how communities can invest more in composting and anaerobic digesters to make better use of food that can't be wasted. And we've gotten a lot of wonderful, actually bipartisan cooperation, a lot of cooperation from industry, and that's one of the few successes that we're currently having in the Farm Bill. But, and in many of these areas, I like to remind people, we have great bipartisan support. Agriculture tends to be a regional issue, you know, where you come from, particularly about commodity crops that you might be protecting in an issue. It's not really Democratic or Republican. Sometimes I'm on the opposite side of my Democratic colleagues. I've had more Republican co-sponsors on my bills this year than I ever had before. Some of them are, you know, kind of right-wing Republicans who don't like government in any possible way, and so they're willing to sign on to a bill to make it easier to access raw milk because the government shouldn't be telling us what to eat. Some of them are people who have just, live in Nebraska or Iowa, and they're seeing the growth in local markets or organic farming and want to be a part of this. So it tends to be a very bipartisan, wonderful place to work. And I just did a forum. This is Sonny Perdue, our current Secretary of Agriculture. He and I just did a roundtable with a Republican from Iowa on food waste. They've made it one of their priorities. So all those things are really great about the Farm Bill, and it should be, now that we're 5 years from the last one, it should be a great time that we're saying, look at the good stuff going on in Congress, but that's not what's going on. So it's being called the Farm Bill fiasco. It could come up for a vote this week, so it's very likely that we're going to be taking it on, and much of the fight is going to have to do with our nutrition programs. So you came here to learn more about farming, but when you realize that 80% is about nutrition, you realize that that's where the politics comes in at its very worst. There's some other political problems, but that is currently where the real fight is. It's so bad that a committee process that has never fallen apart before completely fell apart. The Democrats in the committee refused to vote for it, refused to offer amendments. We're just so mad that they weren't included and that there were such egregious changes about to be made that they just said, no, we're just not going to do it. And it'll be a contentious week on the floor. There will be Republican amendments that I support, but for the most part, most of my colleagues are just saying, we can't live with this. So just so you understand a little bit, SNAP benefits. SNAP is a program like, as I said, it used to be called food stamps. You get about $1.50 a meal to feed yourself and your family. 80% of the recipients of SNAP are disabled, they're elderly, they're children. Many members of our military receive SNAP benefits. If your income is low enough, and a lot of people who receive minimum wage or less and have, families cannot afford to put enough food on their table, and they need to have SNAP. A lot of people use it as that time in their life when they're between jobs, or they've just gotten divorced, or they've been through an illness and they need some support and help. And the proposed changes, I can't get too wonky about it because you'll just all start falling asleep, but they're proposing to change a part called categorical eligibility, which means if you already qualified for another support program, you can automatically get into this program. And it used to be that your state could set what the benefit level would be for categorical eligibility. Some states say 200% of the poverty level. Like I said, these are all wonky things. They're going to drop it dramatically to 130%, and that'll kick hundreds of thousands of people off of SNAP. They want to have job training programs that everybody has to participate in. Most people, they're either working, looking for a job, they're home taking care of their children, they're disabled, or they're elderly. And the proposed bureaucracy would take 10 years to set up. And no one disagrees with the idea that people should be working at a job. But almost all these things are developed to make less and less people eligible and participate with SNAP. They're eliminating SNAP education programs, which help people who do buy things, say, at a farmer's market or a grocery store, learn a little bit more about how to cook that vegetable that they've just met for the first time. So all these things are proposing to be changed. There are other big cuts in the Farm Bill. Conservation is being cut by nearly $1 billion. They're doing some complicated things around what's called mandatory funding and discretionary funding. So almost all programs that used to be mandatory, like everything that went for rural assistance, rural housing, rural education, rural broadband, they're all being changed to discretionary. And again, I don't want to make you all fall asleep, but it's a way of shrinking down a budget, having more competition for what little, quote, discretionary funds we have, and setting up a fight every time we go through a bill or appropriation cycle, because mandatory funding means we've already made an agreement, every year we're going to give it this much money and let's stop fighting about it. And that's happening throughout the whole system. So we have a lot of things we disagree about. Unfortunately, as I said, the biggest one is around nutrition. I have a brilliant program that I'm trying to include this year, which is called the Produce Prescription Program. It's already been done by Wholesome Wave, a wonderful organization in the private sector, but it basically says if you're a family struggling to buy healthy foods, you can get a prescription from your practitioner, your doctor, the clinic you go to, and it'll allow you to take that voucher and go buy more healthy food, because I want to make the point that if people could get more healthy food in the diet, and all of the metrics that have already been done show that this makes a difference, we'll all be healthier in the end, and we should just do everything we can to get healthy food in our school lunch programs, in our SNAP benefit programs, in all of our diets, all of the time, for all the right reasons. It's good for farmers, it's good for the economy, and it's certainly good for all of our health. So the last thing I'll go to is, as you said earlier, everyone wants to know, what am I supposed to do about this? Okay, there's plenty you can do. All of your personal spending decisions have made a huge difference already. You can't discount how much we have changed as a country in our food buying habits. We're buying much more locally. We care about those local farmers. We go to farmers markets. We join CSAs. And people, like I said, at all levels, if they have money in their pocket, are attempting to buy healthier food for their families. And you shouldn't stop that, and you should think a lot about where you buy food and how you can get more food in a farmer's market. You should have as many relationships with policymakers, from city council to town council to state legislator to member of Congress. And people ask me all the time, oh, I send in those postcards, or I make the phone calls and send the emails. Does it matter? It absolutely matters. We all count up how many communications we get about everything all the time. And that's true of me or of people who are on the opposite side of an issue. We all do the same thing. So don't ever worry about doing it. Just do it all you can. Meet with a member of Congress or a state legislator or a city council member anytime you can. It makes a huge difference. If you have a business that's related to this, if you're a chef, if you're a farmer, or you're a consumer that has a certain buying habit, your member of Congress will take that much more seriously, hearing from you one-on-one or whatever you put in the letter, than all the lobbyists who stop through our office every day. It doesn't mean they're always going to vote with what you tell them to do, but people can be swayed by a single story or an interesting piece of information. And we just can't have you do that enough. And I often tell people, just because you might live in a community where you already think, oh, my member of Congress, they're progressive, they think this way all the time, don't ever assume that a member of Congress, on the Democratic Party or the Republican Party is going to vote in a way that you already assume that they're going to vote. Sometimes very progressive members just think like farm, food, and agriculture, oh, that's all taken care of, or that's just a fight about cotton and corn. They need to hear from you that you really care about this issue, that it's a voting issue for you, and that you want them to pay more attention to it. And a lot of times when you live in a conservative district and you think, oh, well, I'll just write that person off. As I mentioned, I work with a lot of Republicans on my bills. And, one I mentioned, Representative Massey from Kentucky. On most issues, he and I are voting the opposite way all the time. But he actually lives off the grid. He doesn't like government to tell him, where to get his electricity. He drives a Tesla to work every day. He grows all his own food. And he is my best co-sponsor on anything on an agricultural policy, because he believes, we should eat healthier food and you should have the right to grow it in the way you want. I have colleagues in Nebraska, as I said, and other places who have seen the changes. So don't ever assume. And don't assume it's only about Congress. I mean, of course, you should talk to your senators, too. They'll get it done once in a while. But more importantly, the state legislature. States make a lot of policies related to food and farming that you don't always think about. And sometimes in communities. It's restrictive zoning laws. It's things that make it more difficult for farmers to farm, or people to grow in their backyard, or all of the wonderful things that we should be doing. School budgets. Make sure that your school is feeding the kids healthy food, that they're putting in a school garden, that they're doing everything they can to engage kids in everything from food waste to healthy eating to how we grow our food, to visit farms. So there is an enormous amount that you can do. And it's never been more important than today, because unfortunately, we're so distracted by every day. We wake up every morning and we say, it couldn't be worse than yesterday, and then it is. And you're worried about that, and we're all worried about that. And we're all worried about the big picture stuff. But food and farm policy is going to get made whether we're paying attention or not. And we can make a real change. I was going to give you a quick success story, and there are some issues I've worked on. And GMO labeling wasn't a total success story, but we got more mail from the day I got elected to the day we voted on it around GMO labeling than I've gotten on anything else. And it's because people were hearing about it. People want to know what's in their food. They may not have known if it's good or bad for you, but I've heard some things about it that raise concern. And my colleagues were all over the map. They were like, well, I don't want to be a Luddite. I don't want to stop progress. Is this about biotechnical research? We were lobbied by Monsanto and the grocery manufacturers at levels that had never been seen before. But in fact, in the end, people switched because they kept hearing from constituents, I don't know how I feel about this, but I deserve to have a label on my food that tells me what's in it. And it's just a right-to-know issue. And while we're not sure how the rule will work out with this Department of Agriculture, and there's plenty of things along the way, it was a really good example of people just picking up the phone, sending those emails, and you know, eventually having more influence than the $35 million that gets spent on lobbying. So I want you to know things do work out sometimes. Some of these things will change. And we will have, you know, someday the opportunity to just have everybody, regardless of their income, regardless of their age, have healthy, fresh food available in their school, in their institution, at home. People will have the ability to build a hoop house if they want to have a small farm in every community that people can get to know the farmer, and young people can engage and be in a practice of farming that's affordable to them, and that you can visit with them and buy from them, and life will be happy and everything will be good. So that's it.